let me start with the Romanticism. I told you to listen to that video lecture because if you find it difficult to follow that in English, then there will be that is there as an additional support for your basic understanding of the chapter. Okay. So Romanticism as a movement, we are going to talk about Romanticism. Do you have an idea? Actually, it's very good for us to teach this paper in third semester itself because you have basic idea about history. The paper history you are learning simultaneously, and you have a basic idea about the time periods and different movements as well as the political scenario of England. So that really it is really nice that we do not have to teach about that as well to make you come to terms with these new movements, because it is just there you are learning history of literature, but the history of literature or any literature is intricately connected with the political scenario as well as the theories as well as the movements which really affected those writings. Interpretations also are to be taken for studies, and that is why we have a paper like literary criticism and theory. So this is about criticism, romantic criticism. Later it comes to be, but here we learn it as a movement, and we know how theory or other critical premises can come out of certain movements. And a very simple example I gave you because that's a new movement, and how feminism, how it is as a movement it came out, and later feminist theory, feminist analysis all became possible in connection with the movement. So some of those were radical movements like challenging the established norms like patriarchy. Patriarchy is the male domination, and feminism as a movement was talking against that. And then some of them felt that not only in the society and our living context we have problem with the patriarchal figures or patriarchal establishment. In writings also such representations come. That is why we have very feeble women characters. They are very acquiescent, they are very obedient, they are very silly, coy, who are never professional, who do not complete their education. So when these characters are portrayed in novels or other literary works, that will in one way or other lead to the enfeeblement of the women who read such literature also. So they wanted the theory of feminism to challenge those when portrayed in literature. We haven't reached up to feminism, but just as a movement, how theory is important in connection with such movements, I tell. So Romanticism also arose in such a context. In the paper that you learn, that is History of English Literature. Normally in some universities, the whole 3 papers are learned together. That means History of English Language and Literature. History of English Language you learn in first semester, which is a very short paper you feel, because that is already divided. It's thrice divided. It is cut into 3 parts, and 3 semesters you can learn, and then so that your learning is really complete. Because just think about the 3 papers that you learn in first, second and third semesters are learned combinedly in the first semester itself. In Kannur University, we had to learn it in that way. Now also that paper is taught in that way. I think either in first or second semester that whole paper is taught in that sense. So that's why we had a very sensible division in this mod, so that we get time to discuss all the writers, major writers, and we get time as well. Otherwise, we are unable to do justice to any of the portions prescribed. So just think about the paper division. Why I'm talking about history is Romanticism as a term has much to do with your history paper. Now see, what is the title of the history of English literature? Language is already done, but history of English literature is divided into 2. That is for, see, history of English literature up to Romantic Revival. You remember the second semester paper is titled History of English Literature up to Romantic Revival. That means that particular revival or that incident, event is or has a lot to do with our literary sensibility. Okay, that is a very high move or very important movement as far as our literature or the literary scenario is concerned. And what is the title of the present paper, the paper that you learn at present, which is taught by Shimli? So what is the name of that paper? History of English Literature from Romantic Revival to the present. That means till date. Even the literature written today or the book that is published or launched today can be part of or should be part of your learning. That is the real sense of that, because we do not have set a time limit for this. Okay, so that you have to be constantly updated. Yeah, teacher tells that this chapter is over, but we cannot end that chapter there. Okay, and same with the history of literary criticism paper as well, because next day another movement may come, next day a lot of changes may come in the perspective, so we have to assume all these in general. Okay, so Romantic Revival as a political in the context of the history of Britain as well as in the history of English literature. Tell me, what do you know about that? What is your idea about Romantic Revival and what is Romanticism? Do you have a basic idea about that? If some of you unmute yourself and start telling that, I'll be happy. That is the way our class has to go. Otherwise, it's just about listening to some tape recording or something. Just tell me. Anyone ready to unmute yourself? Romanticism as a movement, any idea? So, yes, attacked traditionalism is excellent an answer. Romanticism is basically about attacking traditionalism itself. At least that is enough. That is, your typing in the chat box will have a very clear mode of answer. It's one of the methods you can adopt in answering. That's fine. So, what is this attacking traditionalism? Did traditionalism exist only during that time? Don't you see any kind of traditionalism at present? We cannot claim that. I told you, even modernism, we tell that, I'm really modern. But you cannot tell that the whole family, if you take a family, 2 or 3 of the people may be really modern. Modern means it's not just about the dressing or a way of speaking or way of living in a very modern way, thinking all those. But you can see in the same house, many people with a very orthodox and a traditional mode of existing. So that is, you cannot distinguish between time period or anything in the case of modernism and traditionalism. Every time it exists, it coexists. It at the same time both can exist. So kind of existing together. Okay, but Romanticism attacking traditionalism has much significance because this movement actually came against a very strict or it was a time period, the preceding era was actually of a rigid kind of approach towards, that was expressing much rigidity towards every walk of life, not just writing, not just interpretation, not just subjectivity, but every part we could see a kind of strong and strict rule-based living style or rule-based perspective or approach towards life. In every walk of life, we could see the preceding era and their concepts coming and intruding every time. Can you tell me which is that movement that Romanticism attacks? If anyone can answer, the person will be declared to be a very brilliant kind, because it has a lot to do with our PDF as well. The particular text that you have at hand, if you have a basic sensible way of approaching the lessons, you can get the answer in one word. Romanticism as a movement came against one particular movement or one particular time period or approach. Which was the movement that Romanticism wanted to challenge and attack? One of you, please type. If any idea comes, you just type it in the chat box, more than enough. Which was the movement that was attacked or challenged by Romanticism? Definitely, particularly wanted to challenge the approach and attitude of a particular movement. Which was that movement? Only common sense is enough for this answering this question. Only just common sense is needed. Please tell me. Exactly, very good. Neoclassicism is the answer, because neoclassicism, I told you, anyway, in our syllabus, in our movements, the list is not in the chronological order. But in the beginning, we see it to be neoclassicism. Actually, the neoclassic rigidity they wanted to challenge. Chocolates for you. Thank you so much for the answer. Anyway, so happy about it. Okay. So, it's a very brilliant answering. Yes, we have already seen, even Nasma, you gave me the answer, Nasma CH. Yes, Nasma gave me the answer like attacked traditionalism. So, immediately traditionalism based an existence that was there in Britain during neoclassic time itself. Even neoclassic rigidity, that is the term we use for neoclassicism, neoclassic time period. Rigidity, every time they wanted to stick on to rules. Get the point? Yeah. So actually they wanted to challenge the basic notion, that always rule-oriented method of writing, approaching the text, approaching interpretation, subjectivity. All these they were fed up with. The romantic critics, the romantic writers were fed up with. And you can of course list out some of the major romantic writers. Actually their writings bring their criticism. Their writing style brought their criticism. Okay, it's not about bringing the theory first, but let me experiment with my art. That's how Wordsworth came up with his poems. Coleridge came up with his poems. And again, later they developed their theories. Or on behalf of that writings, they developed their romantic criticism. That is, yeah, we are going to do this in our work, and this can be experimented, and this can be a better method for our literary writing as well as enjoyment. You don't have to stick on to the rules as these neoclassic idiots tell. That is always sticking on to rules, always sticking on to these moralistic themes or some very pious themes. We have to enjoy nature. We have to praise nature. We have to be one with nature. So the major idea they wanted to promote, or they wanted to live in harmonious existence, was with the nature itself, to see the beauty of nature. Neoclassicism never wanted that. They always wanted very serious themes in very fixed formats, very rigid rules, very strict observation to grammar, rules, rigid formats, everything they wanted to. They never allowed any kind of freedom of expression. You know, already we came across this. Even you can see that neoclassicism as a movement, the definition ends with the limits upon freedom. And here romanticism, very next term begins with the promotion of freedom. And again, you see the first term, you see there is judged a work of art by its goodness. It's not about the rule, but the goodness of the art. That means, of course, that is something that is the works that give a kind of pleasure, that affords a kind of pleasure. When you read, you should feel like, oh, okay, fine, I am walking in the woods when you read a poem, or to a nightingale. Just think about the poem. You see the birds singing, you hear the birds singing. And neoclassicism never promoted such writings. Oh, what kind of a man is this? He's writing about a bird sitting on the branch and singing. And how he can say that a bird is singing? It's not even singing, it's just making a noise. This is the way neoclassicism viewed everything related to nature. They just wanted everything to be rule-oriented and reasonable. So bird singing itself, the idea, very idea of bird singing and a man spending hours to listen to that is not at all something acceptable for this neoclassic rigidity. But that is only acceptable for Romanticism. Romanticism as a term, actually we have to trace, we have to think, is Romanticism or had Romanticism begun only in the 19th century, or could we trace it back to some other time periods? I will come to that later. But just today let me explain the features of that movement first. Okay, that will be the better idea about it. Okay. Romanticism, you can see the description you get there with the projected file. First idea, judged a work of art by its goodness. That itself gives the idea that everything, that is goodness of art, if that is something enjoyable, you look at a flower and you become happy about it, happy about observing it. You look at a garden and you are so happy, you are one with nature there, and a poet starts writing on that. That is the beauty of your writing, and you are getting enjoyment out of art. It's not at all just about observing the rule and the time I spend. Oh, this is the time that I have to spend on my constitution, or on my writing the rules for the next day class. So this is the way they have as perspective shift on life as well as art. So capacity to please always and please all. See, there is a poem on daffodil. There is something on nightingale. Even you having heard the song of nightingale, even if it is we have never enjoyed the song of nightingale, you can feel the marvelous beauty of the song just by reading that poem by the writer, the romantic writer. That is the style in which they write. They never fall prey to this prosody. At least I have mentioned what prosody is. The composition for the rules for composing verses. This much meter, that should be in trochaic meter, or the other one, and a strong false, for weak sound, strong sound. See, all these rules you can observe. Of course, the poems come out of these rules are better or good, but that doesn't mean that this kind of a writing that praises nature, that gives much importance to the beauty of nature, things of nature, the weather, climate, flowers, butterflies, all these are also to be counted and appreciated. Okay, so delight is the object of literature as far as Romanticism is concerned. Delight is the object of literature. What do you mean by that? Delight means pleasure. So out of reading, you get a lot of pleasure. You feel like watching a garden. You feel like going and observing a flower in the garden once you read the romantic literature. Their writing style itself is entirely different, and that is never never judged by rules. And the power of imagination. Just think about the importance attached with the power of imagination. What do you mean by power of imagination? Can a person who is strict regarding moral and strict regarding the reasoning power or intellectual power can appreciate this power of imagination? No. That is why neoclassicism or classicism, they wanted to demote this imagination. You know, Plato's attack on poetry was especially based on this, right? So, a sudden inspiration. They never wanted that. They never wanted to promote that. Here you see the power of imagination is promoted like anything. You make use of your imaginative power, imaginative capacity. And that's why we have Kubla Khan. You have already studied such poems, and you know how much the power of imagination, how much it has to do with the writing. Kubla Khan as a poem, you just think, can a person who is sticking on to reasoning or intellectual reasoning and logic can write and enjoy that? No. You can never do that, because it is about a pleasure dome. and the kind of natural beauty is described there. All that is surrounding the dome is described in the poem, and you know how beautifully that is narrated. Okay, how beautifully it is composed, you know. And that is why we have the importance given to power of imagination by romantic writing. And why Kubla Khan? Why Coleridge in this context? Because Coleridge is one of the major romantic writers. Just by thinking, just by analyzing their writing itself, we can know what their stance towards literature is. Okay, so Wordsworth's poem. Did you come across any of the Wordsworthian poem? Of course, Solitary Reaper. Didn't you study? Didn't you study Solitary Reaper? Please type the yes or no. Communication on chat box, please. Anyone? Solitary Reaper, did you? Yeah, of course you studied Solitary Reaper. Yeah. So what about Solitary? Yeah, I taught you poetry. In that, I taught you Solitary Reaper. Right, in the second semester itself. Yes. So Solitary Reaper. Just think about a poet. As per Plato, just think about Plato watching this Wordsworth spending his fruitful, the within God's fruitful time, that is to be kept for some very serious deeds, observing a solitary reaper, a very ordinary woman who is reaping, just doing her work and spending his time and composing a poem. If Plato had a stick on his hand with him, he would have beaten Wordsworth. That is the way. He wanted the time to be spent only on serious affairs, like kings making their roles, kings ruling the nation, kings making something about war, or they are planning about war and other constitutional demands. So just think about romantic writers. They are spending their time on some solitary reaper or many other ordinary human beings, and they are very rustic life. Rustic life. What do you mean by rustic life? I will type the spelling. RUSTIC. Rustic life means rural life. Rural life means the very ordinary kind of life, and the romantic writers wanted such kind of people in their writings, as well as in their characters or subject of their imagination. They wanted such ordinary human beings, not always the kings and queens and their very serious and strict life. Okay, not strict, but actually the kind of seriousness is always attached with this royal descents or any other what you call ruling sector. Others are always leading a very simple life to safer. It's about romantic notion of this, romantic notion of the normal subjective life. Okay, now let me tell you. Poet's intuitive and emotional reaction to the subject. Poet's intuitive. What do you mean by intuition? Of course, that is not something really connected with the reasoning or thought evoking. That is intuitive. You are out of a sudden, all of a sudden, you have a basic feeling for a flower or a garden or a brook. Brook means a little stream. So you start writing on that. Okay, so intuitive and emotional reaction to the subject. If you are writing about a river or about the rising sun or about flowers, that is the subject of your writing, poem or a short story or novel, whatever it may be. And what did neoclassicism want? They always wanted human beings as their subject matter. But what about here? This is about Romanticism talks about making anything and everything that brings a kind of intuition, imagination in you, brings a kind of element of beauty in you as the subject of your writing. Okay, you can write about rising sun, moon, stars on the on the sky. See, all these can be your subject matter. There itself you get a very, very high level of freedom in this in connection with your writing subject or theme of writing. And what is the next point you see there? Can you see? Freedom for writers. Of course, that comes only with the freedom of expression and freedom of choosing their subjects for writing. If a person feels like, if a very imaginative poet wants to write on some very natural incidents, natural phenomena like flowers, garden, butterflies, and he is restricted from doing that, telling, see, for example, neoclassicism tells that you should write only on some human beings or human subject. Then that power of imagination is some way or other restricted, and his scope of writing is almost over there, right? And that is why the freedom for writers itself is the main motto of, or major point they raise along with the romantic revival, romanticism, against neoclassical rigidity. There itself you can see it is actually directly it is told it is against the neoclassical rigidity. And then you see it to be romantic revival. There I would like to mention, not just in the 90s, actually romanticism, a romantic revival, if you talk, that is of course in the context of history of English literature, that is of course in the context of which century can we place this romantic revival? Is it in the 20th century? No. Is it in the 19th century? Or is it in the 18th century? Which option will you select? That is the part where your paper, History of English Literature paper, up to Romantic Revival ends and the other part begins. Which is the century? Is it 17th or 18th or 19th? Nesma types it to be 18th. Any other opinion? 18th. Any other opinion? Any other answer? Of course, it is not 20th century. One person opines it to be 18th. And anyone else telling that to be 19th? Okay. So, I will get you a clue for that. That is, lyrical ballads got published in the year 1798. Okay. And the preface to lyrical ballad came in 1800. That means after that combinedly written poems, they wanted, that is Wordsworth wanted to write about his ideas or understanding or his major premises about this attempt to have a revolutionary change in the approach towards literature. So, 1798, as far as our way of calculating the century is concerned, it is of course 18th century. So, of course, the beginning you can say it to be, as Nasma typed it there, to be 18th century itself. Fine. But the whole movement comes to a very different take, and it becomes so, it gets its flux, the real, it comes in the real sense of the sense as a movement, that is with the full-fledged movement, as it comes with its strong opposition towards traditionalism or neoclassicism. It happens with this preface to lyrical ballads. So 1800s. If you want, you can tell it to be, it starts in the 18th century, the very end of the 18th century, and the whole movement in the full-fledged we can see during 19th century itself. Okay. So we can tell 18th century to be the period of neoclassicism. That's why I wanted these two years to be mentioned there. Otherwise, the answer is right. If you calculate the, because the lyrical ballad itself is the we can mark it to be the real stone, the milestone as the beginning of Romanticism, of the beginning of Romanticism as a movement. Okay. But the problem is the whole movement gets its real friction later with the preface that he adds to the collection called lyrical ballads. Preface means the description you get at the beginning of a text, and later only, that is in 1800, and later some other revisions come with that same text. And then Coleridge began with his answer for the same, and so many texts and many literary writings came out for Romanticism as a movement, or as part of Romanticism as a movement. Okay, so romantic revival in the context, let me talk to you. Romantic, the term means, what does the term mean, romantic? The term actually means, it's a French word, that romance, R-O-M-A-N-Z, this French word, from that we get this term romantic. And in France, we know France as a country, that tradition was known for the medieval chivalry conventions. Like, they were always adventurous people. See, we have a tradition of our own. Like, if we talk about even not just in the case of food and other lifestyle, but as a whole, sometimes we talk in terms of the professions we hold on. Like, sometimes we talk about those people who sometimes it's a whole area may be known in the name of, sometimes even the towns are named after the major profession that people adopt or people opt for. Right. So some areas are known for some kind of a work, and the whole area space is in one way or other connected with their lifestyle, their whole. Some people may be there who opt some different profession, but the whole of the place may be in one way or other connected with a particular profession. Just let me say, for example, so people living in the coastal area, for example, most of them find a livelihood by fishing. Okay, some people, like some people who are in the village, most of them find a livelihood by agriculture. Most of them are involved in agriculture. Just think about paddy field. Most of the people, not nowadays we cannot get the idea, because people opt to different professions. They migrate to different areas, they never stay. But there was a time period, there was a time when all of the majority of the people wanted to stick on to the profession, almost like a traditional or inherited profession. Okay, and only a few people stayed away from that or opted for something different. Hope this idea is clear. In the same way, French tradition was known for chivalry. That is, almost all the people of, not about the modern French, but during that time, I'm talking about a very remote time period in history. Okay, but regarding the livelihood of the people and how that area is some way or other, in some way or other connected with the traditional or historical assumption we can draw about it. Even in Kerala context we can draw. Nowadays also we see a lot of people in one space living with the sales. Nowadays most often this is with the people in the coastal area, because they really prefer that. That is again like a traditional mode of establishment. And some agriculture, actually with the urbanization, that tradition is much affected. Nowadays, most of the people in Kerala, we cannot see much of a cluster of families living, finding a livelihood only with this agriculture and all. Okay. So here, French tradition was of a medieval chivalry kind. They always have an adventurous life and saving women. That was the way they see. Like, they are adopting this adventurous life. That is, almost all the youth were ready to join the army. Like, they were finding it their duty to save the nation. So almost all of them were well versed in some of these martial arts and all. So many adventurous stories also came as part of their literature. Okay. So then actually vulgar Latin as an umbrella term for a set of languages like French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, all these uh, the literature or the writings came out in these languages. Any of these languages were actually called Romantic literature during that time. Okay, not in the 18th century. I'm talking very remote time period, very distant past, and such writings were commonly called Romantic literature. I'm not talking about history of English literature, but France as a tradition gave this notion even before that. And any stories written with this notion of adventures or something beyond our reasoning power. Even now we know in movies when you see hero goes and attacks and comes as victorious, triumphant after the fight with some 50 men, we feel like, oh, this will not happen, this is just a romanticizing. So that is a term which we use. So that is an idea which we have to know. This is from French tradition. Even now we can see this French romance. There is an advertisement, even it is going on. It's French romance, French tradition. That is, again, they are known for these romantic notions, not something connected with a love affair or something. This is just about adventures and all. Okay, something beyond our reasoning power. Whatever is portrayed, that is something romantic. Actually, that is what we mean as romanticism, as a common term when we use everything, anything and everything connected with some romance, some adventurous or something beyond our reasoning power. That is romantic. Romantic portrayal of that is just a romantic portrayal. Then we always say like that. Nowadays we have the tendency, this is just a romanticizing of that idea. In reality it is not like that. We say that means it does not have much to do with the reality. Okay, so that is the basic notion you have to draw. So, sharing the feature of such medieval literature we came across in history of English literature even before 19th century. With the Elizabethan tradition, that is almost in the 15th and the 16th century, Elizabeth, as a queen was promoting much of literary sensibility, much of literary ideas, and during her time we could see a lot of writings coming in this way. And that is the Romanticism, romantic literature for the first time in the history of English literature. So it is not something introduced by Wordsworth, but revived by Wordsworth in the 19th century. The political incidents and scenario, political tenor after Elizabethan time, because later many strict rules, Puritanism and neoclassicism, all these came in between, and we had a very, very bad time for literature, not in the sense, but a very setback in literature and its subject matters because of the rigid rules of neoclassicism and other strict tendencies. That is why 19th century, when Wordsworth again brings back this romantic style of writing or romantic style of interpretation and criticism, it is termed to be romantic revival. Not just romanticism, but romantic revival. Because from French, the type of literature began to be introduced in English in Elizabethan time period, because she was a queen who promoted much of literary sensibility. Okay, so that with her a lot of such writings came. So that is the time when if you want, you can tell the Romanticism in English literature first came not just in 19th century but in 16th century itself. But because of the drastic shift in the political context, political scenario, we had a setback to such kind of a literature, and English literature had to go back to very strict rules like neoclassicism, very traditional way of observing rules and limiting the themes as such. But what happens later with the 19th century or with by the end of the 18th century, other people like Wordsworth and all came up with the romantic revival. What do you mean by the term revival? Revival itself signifies something retrieved. So it's only something existed can be revived. Otherwise, it's about introducing. So Romanticism in 16th century, you can say to be Romanticism introduction. But here it is the term, the best precise term is revival itself. So that revival actually we are talking about in the context of learning literary criticism, because during Elizabethan time it didn't come as a movement, because criticism begins only later. Criticism as a tradition in English literature begins only later. If you want to trace, that is only after 17th and 18th century. Okay, not in the 60s. Only during that time actually literature was produced, but as a kind of evaluation of work or as a branch of literature, that didn't exist at all. That is why we needed, with the 19th century romantic revival, we have literature, revival in literature as well as in our criticism. The romantic criticism is a type itself. We have it as a type itself. Hope this idea is clear. Okay, and the influence of France and Germany. Why the influence of France and Germany is again emphasized the. Now you come back to this slide. Influence of France and Germany. The things that I explained right now, you couldn't see, you can't see in the slide. That is not there. But the influence of France and Germany you can see. French Revolution. It is highly promoting liberty, equality and fraternity. Okay, let us keep away equality and fraternity for later. But what about liberty? Again promoting freedom. So of course that has something to do with our romantic revival. Again, that is in one way or other promoting these kinds of freedom oriented movements in English tradition as well. Okay, then natural rights and liberty of man. They are promoting natural rights and liberty of man. So freedom of expression is a natural right, liberty, and that is again prevented with these stricter rigid rules and rule oriented thoughts like classicism and neoclassicism. And spirit of questioning you could see in the French Revolution. So actually neoclassic rules were really questioned by these romantic writers, romantic critics. So you could see the spirit of questioning also with the romantic revival or romanticism as a movement. Okay, and classicism we could see artistic quest for beautiful ordered world. Classicism as a strict rule observing neoclassicism or classicism, both. They wanted only the quest, or they wanted to establish a beautiful and ordered world. They never wanted anyone to go beyond the rules. But what about romanticism? It's given in capitals to highlight. It's a secret longing for the chaos. What is that? Secret longing for the chaos. Longing means wish. Secretly they are wishing for a very chaotic kind of established ideas and all. Everywhere they wanted to have a revision in thinking. Okay, what is wrong with your writing about nature? What is wrong with a very I'll tell you the radical notions coming in the as part of your literary exploration. So this is the way they wanted a very secretly they were longing for chaos. Chaos means very disordered state. It's not in the negative sense of the term, but like you have the freedom to express yourself. No rules can prevent your creativity. That is the sense you have to get from that longing for chaos. And it's something great. The poetry of romantic literature, it's something really beautiful to read. Okay, not just Kubla Khan and Solitary Reaper, many others. See, Ode to Nightingale, Ode to West Wind, all these are the poems you have to go in search of. Then you will understand the beauty and marvelous features of romantic writings, romantic poetry, and romantic, mainly poetry. They were mainly focusing upon poetry itself. Okay, and creativity. Then creativity is given in stars. With a star, that means creativity was promoted as such. Then what about ballads, romance, and ballads and romances were their major literary types they opted. Ballads and romances. Ballads, you know, the orally transmitted songs, ballads. So that has its own freedom. If a woman starts singing one kind of a ballad, others can have the freedom to shift it according to their ideas. That is the beauty of ballad. But just think about a neoclassic poem which is written by observing all the meter and other versification, the rules of versification, prosody. You never have the freedom to have an addition or subtraction or anything in that written rules, written format. So that is the freedom. That is why they wanted to opt for such kind of literary types as well. And capacity to delight. The writings were judged by their capacity to delight. That means anyone and everyone who reads the poem should get a pleasure out of the reading. They should not be worried about the rules and the morality or other morality. It's not about going against morality, but even trying with your literary creative sensibility itself was something disapproving for the classicism. That was not at all approved by these romantic critics. Okay, so that's all with the romanticism as a movement. Okay, thank you so much.